Hey, what's up guys, MugenLord here, and today we're going to talk about Sony once again, because apparently the ex-boss of PlayStation explained the reason why Japan studio had shut down, and I definitely want to give you my thoughts and opinions about Japanese studios when it comes to Sony. So before we can dive into the video, make sure to subscribe button and the notification bell for more gaming content here on this channel. So we're going to dive right into it. It's from an article from PlayStation Lifestyle. It says, Japan studio closed due to lack of hits towards the end, says ex-PlayStation boss. The closure of PlayStation Japan studio in April 2021 didn't really surprise former Sony executive Sean Layden. In a new interview, Layden has shed some light on the beloved developers disbanding, and while he was sad to see it go, Layden understands why Sony made that decision. And yes, when it comes to Japan, especially Sony, man, Sony doesn't feel like a Japanese company anymore. PlayStation doesn't seem like a Japanese brand anymore. Ever since they moved, I mean, the indications there, all the clues are there. They literally just shifted their studio, or just their company, their entire company, over to California anyway. So it's more of a westernized company to begin with. But it's sad to see that a lot of that Japanese studio, the Japan studio, which I've grown up with, a lot of Japanese games made by PlayStation, has shut down, and it's really sad to see. And we're gonna go see what he says, and about the reason. We know that the lack of hits, but let's see what Layden says, and then I'm gonna elaborate on it. So it says PlayStation Studio, Japan studio, struggled to produce a hit game in its final years. Speaking to IGN, Layden said that Japan studio haven't released a hit game in a while, and he thinks that that's an issue that a large number of Japanese developers have been facing. He's of the view that Japanese studios went with an excellent track record started experiencing studios around the PS3 era due to the technical shift, when many of them unable to return to their former glory. There was such a legacy malaise, Layden said of Japan studios. It's tough when a studio hasn't had a hit in a while. Then they forget how that feels. Layden thinks that Sony approach to Team Asabi, which was born out of Japanese studios, is akin to pruning on a bonsai. Layden thinks that Japanese developers like Capcom, to some extent Bandai Namco, are in a good place. However, others like Square Enix, Toei Tecmo, and Konami are still somewhat struggling. This is interesting here. They mentioned Bandai Namco and Capcom. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because the PS3 era, I would say that is a good, and I was also speculating that because, like I said, when we got to the PS3, as we started getting deeper into the PlayStation 3 console, I started noticing this shift in PlayStation's marketing when it comes to their games, their messaging and everything. That's when with the PS3 it started feeling less of a Japanese console and more of a Western console. The thing about Japanese games is that Japanese games are quite different from Western games. That's why I would always call, like, especially Japanese RPGs, I would always call them JRPGs. For the simple fact is that JRPGs have a different method of development or different process of how they develop their games, or how they structure their games and their storytelling and develop their characters, compared to how Western studios develop their RPGs and how they explain and how they develop their narratives and their worlds and their characters and their mechanics and everything. So there's no shade against the Japanese when you put them labels or categorize them. Is that I prefer Japanese media the most because I've grown up with that and I love their style of development in their games. And the thing is, when it comes to Japanese games, they're very unique, in a sense of how they approach, game design. And like I said before, I've grown up with it and I've always enjoyed their style of game development. And when we got to the PS3 and the Xbox 360 era, this is where the Western market has really taken a hold. You have to understand, and a lot of people don't want to give Microsoft credit. Once the Xbox came in, the Xbox had really shifted everything. A lot of Western developers that normally would only develop games for the PC, and because PC had a lot more exclusives back then than compared to today. And you have to understand, once the Xbox came out, a lot of Western developers started developing games for the Xbox, and then of course once we got into the Xbox 360 generation, a lot of that pretty much drilled home even more. So now the Western market has become much more desirable. Games like Halo, games like Call of Duty, a lot of these different games like Gears of War. And so the whole way of how we play our games and what we enjoy from our entertainment in gaming has shifted. So the things that we've always loved and enjoyed from Japanese games, now that the Western market and the Western narrative has taken over the gaming industry, you notice that a lot of Japanese developers could not adapt to this current sudden shift. And it's amazing that Layden had pretty much mentioned Capcom and Bandai Namco, because Capcom and Bandai Namco, I would believe that they were the ones that was the first to really quickly adapt, to this. That's why you've seen this shift in Resident Evil. Resident Evil 4, it started with Resident Evil 4, but Resident Evil 5 and 6 took a completely different shift when it came to it. It became more of that action shooter, and it had that Call of Duty and Gears of War and all those type of gameplay designs that you were seeing from Western games of that era and of that time, of that generation of gaming. You've seen Capcom quickly shifting over their whole gameplay ideology and method. Same thing with Bandai Namco with their studios and how they also released their games. Many other games of that time and of that era, they really started to shift. So they were able to successfully adapt to Western standards when it came to it, while at the same time companies like Square Enix, that is Japanese by heart, and what people love the charm about Square Enix and their RPGs is because it is Japanese, and it didn't work much for them is when they tried to adapt, where they start taking well-known IPs like Final Fantasy and many other IPs, and try to follow trends that the West was dominating in at the time. And at that time, it started hurting Square Enix because gamers were rejecting it. Gamers didn't like this sudden shift in what they were doing with these legendary IPs and trying to adopt it to put a net to cast out to a much wider audience. And then you also have this as well. Since now Western gaming has much more an appeal at that time, people started walking away from Japanese gaming in general. You had games like Gravity Rush, where a lot of people talked about how great that game was, but no one really came out to support that game. No one at all. That's why it was very important when I saw Astrobot, which I'm going to pick up for the Christmas holiday. When I seen Astrobot really called out to me about that era of once where Sony was purely a Japanese company in heart and spirit. It had that Japanese spirit, and when you look at Astrobot, it took you back to that time of Sony when it was a Japanese studio at heart. So when you look at this, when Japanese studios put out games and these games are not being hits, it's because the taste. They didn't adapt because they wanted to be Japanese at heart. They wanted to continue to make games like they would make in Japan. And because the market has shifted and the market had changed, it just didn't work out well for them. And that's a sad thing. And not only that, man, you also have to look at too, man, you have gamers out there who talks about they want these type of games, but none of them show up for these games at the end of the day. And that's what also hurts these studios. And it's just sad to see, man. I would love to see Sony go back to its former glory, in my personal opinion. I want them to go back to the PS1 and PS2 era of gaming. I think they were the best times for Sony, where Sony was really, really a juggernaut. Yes, Sony is still doing well as far as selling consoles and everything, but Sony is just a mere shell of its former self, and it's just not what it used to be. I don't look at Sony the same way. Like I said, my PS5 just sits there. I don't play it as much, and it doesn't offer the experience like I used to, which is why I gravitate more to my Nintendo Switch. Yes, I play my Xbox Series X every once in a while too, but my Nintendo Switch got hundreds or maybe thousands of hours because Nintendo is still Japanese at heart. It still offers a library of games that's Japanese at heart, and that's what I enjoy the most. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Is Layden on point when it comes to why Studio Japan Japan Studio just didn't do well within the last part of his life as a studio, or do you think there's more at play here? I definitely want to hear your thoughts. So if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe button for more gaming content here on this channel. This is MugenLord, sign off. I'll see you game fiends later. Peace out.